there's very few, if any, new communities being built. In fact, it's the only asset class that has a diminishing supply. So there's more mobile home parks across the country that either get redeveloped for higher and better use because they were maybe built 50 years ago on the outskirts of town. Now they're in the middle of path of progress, or that just simply gets shut down.
Are you ready to transform your life? This is a no-nonsense show helping immigrants like you create generational wealth, even while working full-time. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Saket Jain.
Welcome back, my Great to Wealth listeners. Today, we have a good pleasure of speaking with Kevin Bupp. I've been following this man for a while. I'll let him do his own introduction, but he's known as the god of mobile homes. In the investing world, he really got deep into that. Of course, beyond since then, he has expanded his portfolio. With Kevin, without further ado here, welcome to the show.
Saket, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, man. Hey, Kevin, I've given you the title of Godfather of Mobile Home. I don't know if that's the right title or not, but that's for you or for me. Give our listeners an introduction of who you are, what you do, and then we'll go into the migration journey.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I can dig that title. I guess the Godfather of mobile home parks, what have you. We've been doing it long enough. I guess that's very fitting.
We'll catch up.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it fairly condensed. But I've been a full-time investor my entire adult life. I always like to joke and say that I've never had a real job outside of tending bar while I was going through college, and started my real estate journey during college, and bought my first property at the age of 20, and really haven't looked back since. I've had a few other businesses outside of real estate, but real estate's always been the core. It's always been the kind of the bread and butter, the foundation of everything I've done. And I've started with single family, like a lot of people do, built up quite a substantial holdings, about 125 single family properties, my mid 20s. And then started buying multifamily property, really started expanding my horizons a little bit, exploring outside of the model that was taught to me by my original mentor, which was, he was just a small time single family residential investor. Really started expanding my reach into other types of commercial real estate, first being multifamily. It was a very easy transition. Yeah. And then from that point in time to where we're at today, I feel like I've had my hands on most of the different types of asset classes. Personally, I've got investments today in self-storage, medical office, a lot of multifamily, industrial. There's probably a few others, assisted living, but most of those are passive nowadays. I've owned different types of real estate throughout the years. On the active side, what I realize is that residential it makes sense to me. The fundamentals are much easier to understand than that of some of the other asset classes I just mentioned there. And more specifically, I found our pathway to mobile home parks, which is kind of its own niche, right? It's a sub niche of residential multifamily real estate. I found that path back in late 2010, early 2011, and bought my first mobile home park. Didn't know anything about the space. There's a lot of similarities, a lot of carryover from residential multifamily, but also it's got a number of its own unique nuances associated with it, and really fell in love with that space. And we've been buying them ever since. At present time, we've got assets in 14 different states throughout the Northeast, Southeast, and then a few select Midwestern markets. And then outside of that being our core focus, Saket, we always love to be contrarian investors. We like to kind of go against the grain a little bit. I try to find underserved niches that represent outsized potential returns. And so one of the other asset classes that we recently started delving into about 3.5 years ago has been parking. And so parking lots and parking garages in very strategic markets, target markets. And so outside of mobile home parks, we also own parking assets. And so those are kind of our two core focuses that we're invested in today. Again, I've enjoyed the journey, loved the ride. It's been a lot of fun, bumps along the way, but it's been a great journey thus far.
No, that's awesome, Kevin. There's so many nuggets in there. So let me just kind of synthesize that. You knew, one of the very few people who knew right from the college, you want to be an investor when you grow up.
Actually, I need to add another layer of that story in there. So that is actually not the case. The second joke of this is that I always say that real estate found me. I didn't find it. And so I feel very blessed and grateful that it came into my life when it did. I was at a point in my life, Saket, going to school and I knew I wanted to do big things. I just literally had no idea what it was. Just happened to meet a local businessman, that was a real estate investor, became friends with him and saw what he did. Saw he lived a very different lifestyle than what I grew up with. We grew up in a very middle of the road family. We had one family vacation a year. We didn't go without. We didn't have a lot. We didn't have little, right? Like it was all relative. It was good. I had a good upbringing, but when I met David, his lifestyle seemed very different than that of what I felt was the norm of my parents working 9 to 5 and not really having a lot of flexibility and extra money and things like that. So yes, I did not find real estate. It found me, but when it found me, I knew that it was the right fit. I knew this is it. Like this, I can wrap my arms around this. This is exciting. Like I can't stop thinking about it. I read every book I could on the topic. I worked for free for David for a year and a half, literally in between classes and tending bar evenings. My friends made fun of me. They're like, what the heck are you doing? You're working for this old guy. He's not even paying you. And I wasn't going and hanging out at night with them, weekends, whatever. I was out in the field, literally running errands for David. And through that year and a half, I learned so much. And it just really blessed that pivotal moment happened in my life back then.
No, that's awesome. So Kevin, one question that everyone will have, right? It's kind of like from 0 to 125 single family homes. That's in itself is an amazing journey, right? It seemed like you didn't necessarily have a whole lot of capital to begin with to go to that point. How did you make that pivot? And what was your mental state when you learned from David the tricks of the trade, but you also at least at the initial stages thinking about, I don't have the cash.
Yeah.
Right. You may have had it, and maybe my assumption is wrong. So you correct me.
No, I didn't. I had 7,000 when I bought that first property. When I finally got the courage to buy that first property, again, after kind of working with David and around him, I got to meet a lot of his connections. He had private lenders and people he had established relationships with for many, many years. So I became kind of part of his business and was able to leverage some of his relationships. But I literally had $7,000 to my name that I had saved up, slinging drinks at night.
Right.
And that's what I used in addition to leveraging a private lender that I had met through David to buy that first investment property. But very quickly, I learned that my model, or what David's model, it needed some tweaking in order for it to be fitting for me. And David was at a very different stage of his journey. He had been doing this for a couple of decades. And so he always bought assets with the intent of holding them and literally as long-term rentals. And he would do the, what now is coined as the BRRRR strategy. But, he had capital he was working with. And so I realized very quickly that first rental I bought, my intent was to hold it for a long term. I realized it was going to take a very, very long time for me to save up enough of that cash flow, which is easily a few $100s a month, in addition to tending bar, to ever buy another one. And this would be a slow journey. And so what I did is I made a pivot at that point and realized I really learned how to find deals following some of the methods he had taught me. And so I started having the wholesale deals. I learned the wholesale business. I started wholesaling, every 2 or 3 properties I would wholesale and then I would keep one, or, that was kind of the formula. I would wholesale as many as I needed to stack some cash, and then I'd keep a property. And then over time, I continued to build private lender relationships, banking relationships. And it got to the point to where I was able to leverage other people's money, OPM, much more than my own money, which allowed me to start scaling at a greater pace than just, one every couple of months or one, a year or something like that. So it really ramped up within the third year of the business. It took me a couple of years to really get my bearings and really understand the flow and how to scale, but also how to efficiently manage these assets as well. As I was scaling, that was another challenging time. And that's really the first, I'd say, 6 years of my investing journey became, how do I build a portfolio of cash flowing assets, leveraging the relationships I had built over time? But then I realized, Saket, that at some point during that journey, I realized that, and it's very different today. There isn't as much technology that existed back then as it relates to property management. There was a ton of inefficiencies in managing single family properties, especially spread amongst 5 different counties where we own them. And we have leasing agents running around, maintenance guys running around. It was incredibly inefficient. That's what kind of drove me to look at the multifamily model, which I realized had much more scales of economy and efficiencies underneath one roof versus spread out amongst, again, many, many miles and many counties.
Thanks for sharing that journey, Kevin, because you're basically open the kahuna here, kind of going from rags to riches story. So, which is interesting. Help me understand the mindset you were going through. Right? So it took 3 years to scale. Great. So of course you didn't become an overnight success. It took you to become an overnight success. It took you that much time. So help us understand that mindset you were traversing through that stage. What were your fears, if you can recall?
I think initially, we all go through changes within our life. What's important to me today is very different than what was important to me back then. I wasn't married, didn't have children. To me, it was more material things. There's things growing up and that I saw that people had that I wanted. And when I got that first taste of that I could make some decent sized checks by doing real estate deals, that was my mindset of how can I get the house? How can I get the vacations and, all the material items that were important to me at that point in my life. And so that's what really drove me initially. And then I really found the love for it, so the money was the first driver, but then I really found that I was good at it. And I really thoroughly enjoyed kind of the art of the deal, right? I enjoyed working with sellers, working with buyers. I enjoyed taking an ugly property, making it pretty, and watching the smile on the faces of those that either rented it or bought it from us. And so I really enjoyed every aspect of it and really grew a passion for, I call it the game, right? But I mean, like, to me, it became part of my life. It became ingrained in every part of me. So, and as I grew older, got married, got children now. And so my needs and wants and desires are, in my mindset's very different now than what it was back then. I still have that same passion, that same fire for the business and the industry. But for me now, it's all about, how do I buy myself more time and buy myself more freedom to spend as much time as I'd like with my family, with my children, and create memories and experiences with them via vacations or just special moments that I think others tend to miss, right? Professionals that are working 70, 80 hours a week, that don't have flexibility in their career, their jobs, they tend to miss out on some of the special moments. I don't want to miss those. And so now that is of the most importance to me, and real estate allows me to achieve that.
I'm assuming that was one of the biggest trigger for you, Kevin, to continue investing passively, right? Because of course the amount of work and the amount of effort was involved in beginning of fix and flips to where you are now. At that time, you didn't necessarily have the capital, so you had to put your time in. Looking back, if you had the capital, I'm assuming you will try to figure out an efficient way of deploying that capital into some passive that gives you the cash flow and maybe a few actives that gives you the freedom, because now what you're after, it seems, is freedom of time, freedom of choices, freedom to do what you want to do, but not foregoing the wealth. Right? That's an important one, because you can quit your job and be a beach bum and do whatever, but then your wealth's not growing. But we're basically saying, we don't want to part away from growing our wealth, but we also want to find our time.
Yeah, I want my money to work for me while I'm sleeping. But also another important thing to hit on there is that we try to stay in our lane. And our lane for a long time was mobile home parks, for the last decade plus. It's really hard to be great at all things. And so we stuck to that lane for a very long time. And it was a really difficult decision for us to even consider bringing another asset class into our active fray, like what we do on a day-to-day within the company. There's a million other ways to make money in real estate. There's tons of other great asset classes that I believe in the core fundamentals of. Like I'd mentioned, I kind of outlined some ones I'm passively invested in today. And I just know there is absolutely no way that we can ultimately become an expert at all things. And so there's plenty of other folks that are like us that stick to their own lane. They've garnered that expertise over decades of experience in, again, self-storage, multifamily. And so placing my capital with them allows me to diversify across multiple different asset classes, across multiple markets, across multiple operators, without having to garner the day-to-day active expertise that it takes to run a completely different vertical, right? Like there's a lot of similarities, but introducing another asset class into our active business, saying, hey, we're going to start also buying medical office. Well, there's a ton to learn. And there's plenty of other people that have already blown past that initial stage and they're experts at it. They've been doing it long enough. They've gone through a few cycles. I'd rather just put my capital with them. The risk-adjusted returns are much better placing it in their hands than me trying to go at it alone.
And I think I would just add, anyone can learn anything. It's just the amount of effort and time it takes.
That's right.
Are you willing to spend that much time? I don't think it takes tons of smartness to do what you and I do, but it takes time and effort.
Time that pulls you away from your core business, time that pulls you away from your family. Again, it depends on what's important.
Right.
If you realize that you just love working 120 hours a week, you don't have family, that's it, you're a workaholic and that's what drives you, then maybe that's right for you, but that's not me.
Tell us, Kevin, tell us a little bit about mobile home and parking, because those are two asset classes that you love the most right now. Not that you don't love others. These are the ones that you actively manage.
That's correct.
So help us understand why mobile homes, and of course, then what are the similarities? Why did you end up picking parking? Are there similarities in the two assets? Are they completely different?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer that question first. We look at both as somewhat of parking lots. Majority of mobile home parks that we own, the residents actually own the homes themselves, the mobile homes, and we own the infrastructure. We own the land, the infrastructure, the common areas and things of that nature. And they basically rent that spot from us. Although those units rarely ever move. About 98% of units that leave a manufacturer or factory when they're built and make it to a mobile home park, they live and die in that mobile home park.
Isn't that the funniest part?
It doesn't mean they die, but they could be around 6 years.
Sorry to interrupt. I had to say that. Isn't it the funniest part of mobile homes? They're not mobile. Because most
They
people
are.
don't
It just
move.
costs a lot of money to move them, right?
Yeah.
And HUD didn't get involved in the oversight and the regulatory part of manufactured house building process until 1978. And so prior to that, if you actually have, and mobile homes have been being built since the 40s and 50s. So there's lots of parks, especially here in Florida where I live, Arizona, and the Sun Belt states. There's lots of communities that have homes that are, that were built prior to this 1978. And legally, they actually can't be moved. They are not allowed to be on the road. They're not allowed to be transported from one spot to the next. However, anything that has a HUD stamp of approval on it post 1978 can be moved. But even then, there's a fairly significant barrier to move it, and it's cost. Average nowadays, assuming you're going to move it in town to maybe 10, 15 miles away to a plot of land or to a different community, the average single wide is going to cost you to actually break it down, move it, reset it, connect all utilities again. You're looking at $10,000. And the demographic that we're typically serving is, it's affordable housing. It's folks that are blue collar workers that are making, minimum wage or maybe slightly greater than that. They're a lot of times living paycheck to paycheck, and very rarely would they ever have, $7, $8, $9, $10,000 sitting aside to move their home. And there's really no economic gain for them spending that amount of money to move that home. They're not going to recapture it anytime soon. In addition to that, mobile homes are their personal property, so they're depreciating assets. And so economically, it just doesn't make sense. Even if they had the wherewithal to do it, it just doesn't make sense to actually move a home from one spot to another. About the only time we ever see a home leave our community, and it happens on a really rare occasions. And that's if, let's say that someone's been living there for 20 years and a relative just happens to, give them a piece of land out in the country, that's in, a close proximity to where they're at. And they say, hey, here's an acre for you. It's actually zoned. You're allowed to have a mobile home there. There's already a septic and a well there. Have at it. That's literally happened. Probably I could count on two hands out of the thousands of lots that we've owned. That's happened. So it happens very rarely.
Got it.
Yeah. So back to your original question was like some of the similarities. Yeah, we look at them both as parking lots and mobile home parks. While mobile home parks are much more akin to that of they're multifamily. They are. I mean, it's just a different form of multifamily. But what we have found is that the residents tend to be a lot stickier, and many reasons. One of the big ones being just the barrier of moving that home. And if they decide that they don't want to live in that community anymore, Socket, it's very similar to that of if you own your home. Well, I want to move somewhere else. I'm going to put it up for sale. I'm going to wait for a qualified buyer to come buy it. But you got to continue paying your property taxes, your insurance, and all that. Same thing goes there. They put their home up for sale. They continue paying the lot rent, all the other expenses associated with it. New buyer comes in. New buyer assumes the lot rent responsibility. Old person moves to their new home and wherever that might be. And we very rarely ever have a hiccup in the income stream, which is a beautiful thing. And we've got residents that have lived in some of our communities for 40 plus years that we accumulated, we acquired when we bought the community, but 40 plus years.
Now that's actually an amazing thing because there's so much stickiness, right? And then also you're adding value, because I know there's mobile homes sometimes get a bad rep that you end up becoming slumlords. But I think in your case it's very different, right? You're adding value to the community. You're improving their lives.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that mobile home parks kind of get lumped into one bucket, and it's the trashy bucket. And I always like to compare it to, you can go to any city, but let's take Tampa, where I'm based out of. Let's talk about single family home neighborhoods. There are plenty parts of town that have a really, really rough homes, like scary parts of home, dangerous, like drugs, sex, rock and roll, like all the bad stuff happening. Or a different part of Tampa, we go and it's a very middle of the road, blue collar subdivisions, middle class, plenty of those. And then go to the other part of town and there's very nice subdivisions, high end, white collar type subdivisions. The same exists in mobile home parks. And there's really rough ones on the wrong side of tracks. There's middle of the road. And then there's, depending on the area they're located in, there's some really high end. They wouldn't even fit in the category of affordable housing. They're more lifestyle choices than anything. Folks choose to live there. Like here in Florida, there's a lot of lifestyle communities that they've got 3 tennis courts, 4 swimming pools, community clubhouse. They've got activities directors, and a lot of the folks that live there, it might be a second home, it might be their permanent resident, but they're not inexpensive. There's some parks right near me that have $1,400 a month lot rents, and that's you own your home, you're paying $1,400 a month in lot rent, and your home you might have paid $150,000 for, right? And so it's by no means affordable housing. Yeah. And, again, the same exists with apartment complexes as well. You got low end, middle, and high end as well. But unfortunately, mobile home parks all get lumped into that low end bucket.
They do. What is the reason why you're seeing? Because, over the last few, several years, I've been hearing that, Warren Buffett's buying mobile homes all over. It has seen a demand. The demand for the mobile homes has seemed to have gone up. So is there a macro play that's happening in the mobile home world that people are not necessarily aware of?
Yeah, that's right. 10 years ago, it was kind of under the radar. Warren Buffett he owns Clayton, and so Clayton is the largest manufacturer in the country, in the world of manufactured houses. He's been in the space for quite some time. Sam Zell owns Equity Lifestyle. Sam Zell, coined as one of the smartest investors of our time. He's been in the space for I think over 20 years now, and I think up until about 10 years ago, it was just really under the radar. I don't know how else to put it. Similar to self-storage. Self-storage just really didn't get a lot of attention. Those that knew, and those that didn't. And, institutional investors, they looked at both those asset classes. They're not sexy. What's sexy about self-storage? You're buying garage space, right? Like there's nothing inherently sexy about that. The same with mobile home parks, right? Especially since they're lumped into that garbage bucket, right? And I think that over time, investors, especially institutional investors, they get forced to look for new avenues to get outsized returns. And, sooner or later, mobile home parks became exposed as one of those particular assets. And once it became exposed, once Blackstone came in and rolled out a fund of $1 billion, I want to deploy it into the space, others took notice. And ultimately, over the last 5 years, we've seen an accelerated roll up from multiple different institutional investors coming in and really consolidating the space. And so it's driven cap rates down, it's driven prices up, and, big barrier to entry in the space. And what's really causing this massive supply demand imbalance is that there's very few, if any, new communities being built. In fact, it's the only asset class that has a diminishing supply. And so there's more mobile home parks across the country that either get redeveloped for higher and better use because they were maybe built 50 years ago on the outskirts of town. Now they're in the middle of path of progress, or that just simply gets shut down. There's a negative gain of new communities being built across the country. So you got this increased demand, low supply, diminishing supply, and it's just creating this massive imbalance. And so it's great. There's pros and cons of that. 7 years ago, if we wanted to sell a community, we add value to it. Our pool of buyers wasn't as sophisticated, and we might not be able to garner the type of price point that we can today. However, on the front side buying, we might not have had as much competition, but now we got a lot more competition. But on the back end, when we go to sell, we've got institutional buyers that are lining up willing to pay premium prices. And so there's pros and cons with different groups coming into the space, but it is a space that's got a limited runway. Again, with this no new supply coming on the market, once all the good parks are gone, doesn't mean they won't transact again, but once the space really gets consolidated, I don't think we'll find another time, in the next 15, 20 years where there's going to be massive value add plays in good markets in the mobile home park space.
Right. And Kevin, as people are evaluating mobile home, who to invest with, what are some of your criteria when you're buying mobile home parks? And because, in apartment complexes, we have certain metrics that we look into. Help us understand in the mobile home parks.
Very similar to that of multifamily. We want to be in growing markets that has, employment diversity. We want to have a low unemployment rate. We want to have our median household income. We're looking for $50,000 a year plus a median household income. We will stretch a little bit wider as far as geographical targets than that of what a lot of multifamily investors do. And the main reason is that there's limited supply. And so it's very challenging at this point in time for me to come and say, Socket, we're only going to buy in Atlanta, Georgia. And offhand, I don't know how many total mobile home parks are in Atlanta MSA, but let's just say there's 500 of them. Well, more than likely, a large number of those have already transacted, have been consolidated. The mom and pop owners are no longer around, and there's a lot of institutional capital already there. And so in order to actually get a decent sized footprint in Atlanta, that'd be very, very challenging to do. It'd take a lot of time if possible at all. And so we go to wherever the opportunity exists. But as far as size of the community itself, we want 100 lots or larger is kind of our target. The bigger, the better. Very similar to that of multifamily. We see efficiencies in scale, and we're really only buying a market where we feel that we can actually garner a decent sized footprint once we acquire that first community. Ideally, we like to have 500 plus units in one particular market within 20, 30 minutes of one another so that we can, again, gain some scales of economy there. But those are some of the general criteria. But again, very, very similar to that of multifamily. We want to make sure that people have jobs, that people aren't moving away from the area, that employers aren't moving out of that area. We want to know the park's in a great part of town, that good schools. Even folks that are on limited budgets want their kids to go to the best schools. And so again, in an ideal scenario, we want the ugliest property in the best part of town. Again, very similar to that of I want to buy the C- class apartment complex, but in the B+ part of town. That is a perfect value add story. It aligns directly with our investment philosophy and is one that we found great success in pulling off.
Awesome. And Kevin, in your case, kind of like, when you compare your investments as a passive investor into a mobile home park, let's say a multifamily, right? Mm-hmm. Are they even comparable? Are they fair to compare the two? Are they similar? Is one you consider more risky than the other? How do you evaluate the two? Because you're also
No, I mean, again, a lot of similarities. I will say that our philosophy is slightly different than that of a lot of the multifamily investors. A lot of the deals that trade nowadays in multifamily, like there has to be an exit in order to hit that target IRR. There has to be. We're typically able to, to buy a lot of the parks that we buy with a little more meat in the bone so that we're not necessarily forced to exit out in a 3 to 5 year span. And so we've had great success with just doing a recap in a 3 to 5 year span and actually keeping our investors in the deal, getting all the original capital back, which over the long period of time will drive down the IRR, but overall will allow us to have infinite returns, infinite cash flow with the investors. So our investors, we typically look for the type of investors that are in more they're okay with slower growth and wealth preservation stage than that of those that need to hit a high double digit, knock it out of the park IRRs every single time. We're much less IRR driven than that of a standard multifamily property is today. And that's probably the best comparison to maybe give you.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of times that we've exited out in a 3 year span after we've executed the business plan and knocked it out of the park with the IRRs. But overall, returns are similar.
Options, right? You have more exit options, which always helps.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. And I think two things. One was you use the term recap. We have our theme of the show is No Investor Left Behind. So recap is essentially refinancing. It's a fancy word for refinancing for my listeners.
That's right.
So I think the second thing is a few minutes ago, maybe I think it was a different question where you talked about it's a personal property, right? Mobile home.
That's correct.
So when you as a mobile home owner, or mobile park owner, I should say, not a mobile home, how does the tax depreciation work? Because, in a multifamily, through cost segregation, you got a 5, 7, 15 and rest. But if mobile home is actually a personal asset, I know you're not a tax attorney or a tax accountant.
Yeah. So in most cases, we don't own the mobile homes themselves. So just talking about the actual, obviously you can't depreciate raw land, but any mobile home community that we're purchasing, most of the time, we're not buying a mobile home park that's in the middle of town. Like it's not in the heart of Atlanta. It's on the outskirts where maybe the raw land value isn't all that substantial. And so what we have found is looking at the infrastructure, the water lines, the sewer lines, the curb stops, the asphalt, all those other improvements that exist within a mobile home park allows them to be incredibly tax efficient. In fact, we get cost studies done on every park we buy. And on average, we're able to depreciate roughly about 70% of the overall purchase price.
That's awesome. All right, Kevin. So we're going to shift the gear here. So we're going to go into the second part of our episode here. So you've done tremendously well in everything that you have tried to do, because I think partly because you just have a great work ethic. I don't think you got lucky, you just worked hard towards it. So help us understand, if you were to go back to your 20-year-old self and give them one insight into what has made your life migration path much easier, or what could make it for them, what would that one insight be?
Yeah, my answer is kind of cliche, but I wish I would have figured out the efficiencies of larger scale a lot sooner, not just from a management perspective, from a financing perspective, just from accomplishing larger life goal perspective. I look back and I see the amount of effort and energy it took me to acquire all those single family homes. Again, I didn't have a wife, I didn't have kids. I enjoyed what I was doing. I enjoyed grinding, right? Like now everyone kind of brags about grinding. I think that's a joke. I think they need to figure out a more efficient way to run their life, what they need to do. And so I wish I would have figured that out. I figured it out. I feel like I figured it out, soon, but not soon enough. And I'm very grateful for the path that was shown to me, because I wouldn't be where I'm at today if it wasn't for that. But I wish I would have learned some of those efficiencies of larger scale much sooner than I did.
Yeah. What do you think, Kevin, prevents people to go big instead of, buying a duplex versus fear?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think everyone visualizes fear in a different way, and they create their own image of what that looks like in their own brain, and maybe what that worst case scenario might look like. And I think most people just exaggerate whatever that worst case scenario might be. I'm always open minded. it just had not been exposed to me. I'm always been very open-minded about different types of opportunities and just keeping my, my mindset free to expand, when an idea presented itself. Some people are not that way. Just for me, it had not presented itself soon enough. And so I wish it would have, but I think others, it might be presented to them and they conjure up this fear, this image of just, death and losing my house. I die if this doesn't go right. And normally that's just not the case. I like to go through a little exercise in my brain of kind of the worst case scenario. Ask yourself, what is the worst case scenario if this deal goes sideways? First, like 7 or 8 answers that you actually give yourself are not even remotely close. They're so over exaggerated of what a true worst case scenario is. If you continue to drill down and be honest with yourself, what you'll probably find is that you'll arrive at like a real world, and maybe you need a third party perspective to help you kind of go through this exercise. You'll arrive at what a real world worst case scenario is, and probably realize that it's nearly as bad as what you had thought, and it's probably worth maybe taking the risk if the opportunity presents itself.
No, I agree, because I remember, just kind of reflecting back on my own experience when I shifted from a single family to multifamily. My limiting belief, and I distinctly remember it, only rich people can buy apartments, and I don't have the money, right? But once I was exposed to the world of syndication, the whole world just all my limiting beliefs collapsed. Because now, to your point about it being exposed in a third-party conversation helps. Because if you're only talking to yourself, you're only talking to yourself with a mental model that's true for you, which is your own blueprint. And there's not a lot of flexibility.
I think it's also the circle you surround yourself with, in that, if you're only around others that are doing exactly what you're doing today and you hope to do bigger things, and again, like, it's so foreign that's scary in and of itself. I mean, think about where you and I are at today, right? Like, to us, we're doing big deals. I mean, they're doing multi-billion-dollar, multi-phase deals. And to me, I wouldn't say it's scary, but it's overwhelming to think about, because it's so very different. It's such a different world than the world I'm living in today. And so if I so chose to want to go down that path, at least I have a better direction where to go. I need to start surrounding myself with those billionaires that are doing these multi-billion-dollar projects. And again, I think just putting yourself in the right circle, really fighting to get into that right circle around those that are not doing what you're doing today, but those that are being successful at where you want to be here in the future.
Correct. What do they say? You are the sum of the 5 people that you surround yourself with. Really, you got to figure out who you spend your time with. So, Kevin, the second question there is, we got a higher perspective, as in, what is your vision, desire to humanity to migrate intentionally towards?
Just to be kind to one another. I feel like there's so much separation in this country with politics and everything that's been going on over it's more than just last 3-4 years. It's just see a lot of divide happening in the country, and it's unfortunate to see. And I know it's so simple, but it's so seemingly difficult at the same time. But just be kind to one another, right? Have empathy, have a heart, be willing to help the next person in line and help them get a leg up. And I think by having that mentality, I think we all grow into bigger, better people, and all find ourselves in a much better place in life.
Yeah, no, I think very well said. It's actually, I think I go back to your previous question, which is all about limited beliefs. Is because we don't want to help people, or we can't be kind because of our own limited beliefs. We're not exposed to different ideas. And the more you talk to people who are different than you, doesn't mean they're better than you or worse than you or different than you. Your view of the world could completely be opened up. You're going to start looking at things very differently.
Yep,
so Kevin, I completely agree. And thank you again for these amazing insights and a peek into your life. That said, Kevin, where can people find you?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on all the different social media channels, but if you want to learn, what I'm doing on a personal level, maybe, listen to the podcast. I've got a couple of podcasts I host, one primarily that's focused on commercial real estate. I've been doing it for like 9 years. You can go over to my personal website, kevinbupp.com. If you want to get a sense of what we're doing in the mobile home park and the parking space from an investment perspective, you can visit our company website at investwithsunrise.com. And then Saket, I would love, if you wouldn't mind, I published a book back in April of this year. Would love to give a free copy to all your listeners if you wouldn't mind me sharing.
Yeah, please, let's do that.
If you guys want a free copy of my recent book, it's Cash Flow Investor, How to Create Financial Freedom Investing in Commercial Real Estate. Launched it back in April. You can either go spend $20 on a copy on Amazon, or go to kevinbupp.com/free book. Again, kevinbupp.com/free book, and you can grab yourself a free copy of that. So
great. I would highly encourage everyone to go avail that opportunity. I have that book already, and I did spend $20 or whatever it costed on Amazon because I wasn't smart enough. Yeah. That's awesome. So I would highly encourage. So we'll include all this information in the show notes below, Kevin, so that folks can reach out to you and kind of connect with you. Well,
right.
with that, Kevin, thank you again for being on the show. We really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man, but thank you.
It's been a lot of fun, Saga. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all that you do for educating folks out there and taking the time and energy and resources to do this show.
Awesome, buddy. Cheers.
If you got value from this episode, you might consider sharing this content with a friend. But most importantly, be sure to take action on what you've learned. One way you can take the next step is to connect directly with Socket on an investor call. That link is waiting for you in the show notes below.
The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. Please consult your own advisors when making any investment decisions. Keep listening. We'll see you on the next episode.